Truman Capote, House of Flowers. Ottilia should have been the happiest girl in the Port-au-Prince, as Baby said to her. Look at all the things that can be put to your credit. Like what? Said Ottilia. For she was vain and preferred compliments to pork or perfume. Like your looks, said Baby. You have a lovely light color, even almost blue eyes, and such a pretty, sweet face. There's no girl on the road with stidder costumers. Every one of them ready to buy you all the beer you can drink. Tilly conceded that this was true, and with a smile continued to total her fortunes. I have 5 silk dresses and a pair of green satin shoes. I have 3 gold teeth, worth 30,000 francs. Maybe Mr. Jemson or someone will give me another bracelet. But Baby, she sighed, and could not express her discontent. Baby was her best friend. She had another friend too, Rosita. Baby was like a wheel, round, rolling. Junk rings had left green circles on several of her fat fingers. Her teeth were dark as burnt tree stumps, and when she laughed you could hear her at sea, at least so the sailors claimed. Rosita, the other friend, was taller than most men, and stronger. At night, with the costumers on hand, she minced about lisping in a silly dog voice. But in the daytime she took spacious, low pink strides, and spoke out in a military baritone. Both of Ottilia's friends were from the Dominican Republic and considered it reason enough to feel themselves a cut above the natives of this darker country. It did not concern them that Ottilia was a native. You have brains, Baby told her, and certainly what Baby doted on was a good brain. Ottilia was often afraid that her friends would never discover that she could neither read or write. The house where they lived and worked was rickety, thin as a steeple, and frosted with fragile Bergen valley-vined balconies. Though there was no sign outside, it was called the Champs-Élysées. Proprietress and spinsterish, smothered-looking invalid ruled from an upstairs room, where she stayed locked away, rocking in a rocking chair and drinking 10 to 20 Coca-Colas a day. All counted, she had 8 ladies working for her. With the exception of Ottilia, no one of them was under 30. In the evening, when the ladies assembled on the porch, where they chatted and flourished paper fans that beat the air like the Lyris moth, Ottilia seemed a delightful dreaming child surrounded by older, uglier sisters. Her mother was dead. Her father was a planter who had gone back to France, and she had been brought up in the mountains by a rough peasant family. The sons of whom had each at a young age lain with her in some green and shadowy place. 3 years earlier, when she was 14, she had come down for the first time to the market in Port-au-Prince. It was a journey of 2 days and a night, and she'd walked carrying a 10-pound sack of grain. To ease the load, she'd let little of the grain spill out, then a little more, and by the time she had reached the market there was almost none left. Ottilia had cried because she thought of how angry the family would be when she came home without the money for the grain. But these tears were not for long. Such a jolly nice man helped her dry them. He brought her a slice of coconut and took her to see his cousin, who was the proprietress of the Champs Elise. Ottilia could not believe her good luck. The jukebox music, the satin shoes, and joking men were at stage and marvelous as the electric light bulb in her room, which she never tired of clicking on and off. Soon she had become the most talked-of girl on the road. The proprietress was able to ask double for her, and Ottilia grew vain. She could pose for hours in front of a mirror. It was seldom that she thought of the mountains, and yet, after 3 years, there was much of the mountains still with her. Their winds seemed still to move her round. Her hard, high haunches had not softened, nor had the soles of her feet, which were rough as lizards' hide. When her friends spoke of love, of men they had loved, Ottilia became sulky. How do you feel if you're in love? She asked. Ah, said Rosita, with swooning eyes. You feel as though pepper has been sprinkled on your heart, as though tiny fish are swimming in your veins. Ottilia shook her head. If Rosita was telling the truth, then she had never been in love, for she had never felt that way about any of the men who had come to the house. This so troubled her. At last she went to see a Hongan who lived in the hills above town. Unlike her friends, Ottilia did not tack Christian pictures on the walls of her room. She did not believe in God, but many gods, of food, light, of death, ruin. The Hongan was in touch with these gods. He kept their secrets on his altar, could hear their voices in the rattle of the guard, could dispense their power in a potion. Speaking through the guards, the Hongan gave her this message. You must catch a wild bee, he said, and hold it in your closed hands. If the bee does not sting, then you will know you have found love. On the way home, she thought of Mr. Jamison. He was a man past 50, an American connected with an engineering project. The gold bracelets chattering on her wrists were presents from him. And Ottilia, passing a fence snowy with honeysuckle, wondered if after all she was not in love with Mr. Jamison. Black bees festooned the honeysuckle. With a brave thirst of her hand, she caught one dozing. Its stab was like a blow that knocked her to her knees. And there she knelt, weeping until it was hard to know whether the bee had stung her hand or her eyes. It was March, and evenings were leading towards carnival. At the Champ Elias, the ladies were sewing their costumes. Ottilia's hands were idle, for she had decided not to wear a costume at all. On rare weekends, when drums sounded at the rising moon, she sat at her window and watched with a wandering mind the little bands of singers dancing and drumming their way along the road. She listened to the whining and the laughter, and felt no desire to join in. Somebody would think you were 1,000 years old, said Baby, and Rosita said, Ottilia, why don't you come to the cockfight with us? She was not speaking of an ordinary cockfight. From all parts of the island, contestants had arrived, bringing their fiercest birds. Ottilia thought she might as well go, and sewed a pair of pearls into her ears. When they arrived, the exhibition was already underway. In a great tent, and seaside crowd sobbed and shouted. sobbed and shouted, while a second crowd, though those who would not get in, thronged on the outskirts. Entry was no problem to the ladies from the Champs-Élysées. A policeman friend cut a path for them and made a room on a bench by the ring. The country people surrounding them seemed embarrassed to find themselves in such stylish company. They looked shyly at baby's lacquered nails and rhinestone combs in Rosita's hair, the glow of Atelia's pearl earrings. However, the fights were exciting, and the ladies were soon forgotten. Baby was annoyed that this should be so, and her eyes rolled about, searching for glances in the direction. Suddenly she nudged Ottilie. Ottilie said, "You've got an admirer. See that boy over there? He's staring at you, like you were something cold to drink." At first she thought he must be someone she knew, for he was looking at her as though she should recognize him. But how could she know him when she'd never known anyone so beautiful, anyone with such long legs, little ears? She could see that he was from the mountains. His straw country hat and the worn-out blue of his shirt told her as much. He was a ginger color, his skin shiny as a lemon, smooth as a guava leaf, and the tilt of his head was as arrogant as the black and scarlet bird he held in his hands. Ottilie was used to boldly smiling at men, but now her smile was fragmentary. It clung to her lips like cake crumbs. Eventually, there was an intermission. The arena was cleared, and all who could crowded into it to dance and stamp while an orchestra of drums and strings sang out carnival tunes. It was then that the young man approached Ottilie. She laughed to see his bird perched like a parrot on his shoulder. "Off with you," said Baby, outraged that a peasant should ask Ottilie to dance, and Rosita rose menacingly to stand between the young man and her friend. He only smiled and said, "Please, madame, I would like to speak with your daughter." Ottilie felt herself being lifted, felt her hips meet against his in the rhythm of music, and she did not mind at all. She let him lead her into the thickest tangle of dancers. Rosita said, "Did you hear that he thought I was her mother?" And Baby, consoling her, grimly said, "After all, what do you expect? They're only natives, both of them. When she comes back, we'll just pretend we don't know her." As it happened, Ottilie did not return to her friends. Royal, this was the young man's name. Royal Bonaparte, he told her, had not wanted to dance. "We must walk in a quiet place," he said. "Hold my hand, and I will take you." She thought him strange, but did not feel strange with him, for the mountains were still with her, and he was of the mountains. With their hands together, and the iridescent cock swaying on his shoulders, they left the tent and wandered lazily down a wide road, then along a soft lane where birds of sunlight fluttered through the greenness of leaning acacia trees. "I have been sad," he said, not looking sad. "In my village, Juno is a champion, but the birds here are strong and ugly. And if I let him fight, I would only have a dead Juno. So I will take him home and say that he won. Ottilie, will you have a dib of snuff?" She sneezed voluptuously. Snuff reminded her of her childhood, and mean as those years had been, nostalgia touched her with its far-reaching wand. "Royal," she said, "be still a minute. I want to take off my shoes." Royal himself did not have shoes. His golden feet were slender and airy. And the prints they left were like a track of delicate animal. He said, "How is it that I find you here? In all the world here, where nothing is good, where the rum is bad and the people thieves? Why do I find you here, Ottilie?" "Because I must make my way, the same as you. And here there's a place for me. I work in a kind of hotel." "We have our own place," he said, "all the side of a hill. And there, at the top of the hill, is my cool house. Ottilie, will you come and sit inside it?" "Crazy," said Ottilie, teasing him. "Crazy." And she ran between the trees. And he was after her, his arms out as though he held a net. The bear Juno flared his wings. Crowd flew to the ground. Scratchy leaves and fur of moss thrilled the soles of Ottilie's feet as she lilted through the shade and shadows. Abruptly, into a vein of rainbow fern, she fell with a thorn in her heel. She winced when Royal pulled out of the thorn. He kissed the place where it had been. His lips moved to her hands, her throat, and it was as though she were among drifting leaves. She breathed the odor of him, the dark, clean smell that was like the roots of things, geraniums, of heavy trees. "Now that's enough," she pleaded, though she did not feel that this was so. It was only that after an hour of him, her heart was about to give out. He was quiet then. His streaky-haired head rested above her heart. "And shoo," she said to the gnats that clustered about his sleeping eyes. "Shush," she said to Juno, who praised around crawling at the sky. While she lay there, Ottilie saw her old enemy, the bees, silently in a line like ants, and bees were crawling in and out of a broken stump that stood not far from her. She loosened herself from Royal's arms and smoothed her place on the ground for his head. Her hand was trembling as she laid it in the path of the bees, but the first that came along trembled on her palm, and when she closed her fingers it made no move to hurt her. She counted 10 to be sure, just to be sure, then opened her hand, and the bee in spiraling arcs climbed the air with a joyful singing. The proprietors gave Baby and Rosita a piece of advice. "Leave her alone, let her go a few weeks, and she will come back." The proprietors spoke in a calm of defeat. To keep Ottilie with her, she had offered the best room in the house, a new gold tooth, a kodak, an electric fan, but Ottilie had not wavered. She had gone right on putting her belongings in a cardboard box. Baby tried to help, but she was crying so much that Ottilie had to stop her. It was bound to be bad luck. All those years falling out of a bride's possessions. And to Rosita she said, "Rosita, you ought to be glad for me instead of standing there wringing your hands." It was only 2 days after the cockfight that Royal shouldered Ottilie's cardboard box and walked her in the dust towards the mountains. When it was learned that she was no longer at Champs-Élysées, many of the costumers took their trade elsewhere. Others, though remaining loyal to the old place, complained of a gloom in the atmosphere. Some evenings there was hardly anyone to buy the ladies a beer. Gradually it began to be felt that Ottilie, after all, would not come back. At the end of 6 months, the proprietor says, "She must be dead." Royal's house was like a house of flowers. Wisteria sheltered the roof. A curtain of vines shaded the windows. Lilies bloomed at the door. From the windows, one could see far, faint winkings of the sea, as the house was high up a hill. Here the sun burned hot, but the shadows were cold. Inside the house was always dark and cool, and the walls rusted with pasted pink and green newspapers. There was only one room. It contained a stove, a teetering mirror on top of a marble table, and a brass bed big enough for 3 fat men. But Ottilia did not sleep in this grand bed. She was not allowed even to sit up on it, for it was the property of Royal's grandmother, old Bonaparte. A shattered, lumpy creature, vulgar as a dwarf and bald as a buzzard. Old Bonaparte was much more respected for miles around as a maker of spells. There were many who were afraid to have her shadow fall upon them. Even Royal was wary of her, and he stuttered when he told her that he'd brought her home a wife. Motioning Ottilia to her, the woman bruised her here and there with vicious little pinches, and informed her grandson that his bride was too skinny. She will die with her first. Each night the young couple waited to make love until they thought old Bonaparte was gone to sleep, sometimes stretched on the straw moonlit pallet where they slept. Ottilia was sure that old Bonaparte was awake and watching them. Once she was a grumpy, starstruck, eye shining in the dark. There was no use complaining to Royal. He only laughed. What harm was there in that old woman who had seen so much of her life wanting to see a little more? Because she loved Royal, Ottilia put away her grievances and tried not to resent old Bonaparte. For a long while she was happy. She did not miss her friends or the life in Port-au-Prince. Even so, she kept her souvenirs of those days in good repair. With the sewing basket baby had given her as a wedding gift, she mended the silk dresses, the green silk stockings, and now she never wore. For there was no place to wear them. Only men congregated at the cafe in the village, at the cockfights. When women wanted to meet, they met at the washing scene, but Ottilia was too busy to be lonesome. At daybreak, she gathered eucalyptus leaves to start a fire and begin their meals. There were kitchens to feed, a goat to be milked. There was old Bonaparte's whining for attention. 3 and 4 times a day she filled a bucket of drinking water and carried it to where Royal worked in the cane fields a mile below the house. She did not mind that on this visit he was gruff with her. She knew that he was showing off before the other men who worked in the fields and who grinned at her like split watermelons. But at night, when she had him home, she'd pull his ears and pout when he treated her like a dog, until in the dark of the yard where the fireflies flamed, he would hold her and whisper something to make her smile. They had been married for about 5 months, when Royal began doing the things he'd done before his marriage. Other men went to the cafe in the evenings, stayed whole Sundays to a cockfight. He couldn't understand why Ottilia should carry on about it. But she said he had no right behaving the way he did, and if he loved her, he would not leave her alone day and night with that mean old woman. "I love you," he said, "but a man has to have his pleasures too." There were nights when he pleasured himself until the moon was in the middle of the sky. She never knew when he was coming home, and she would lie fretting on the pallet, imagining she could not sleep without his arms around her. But old Bonaparte was a real torment. She was about to worry Ottilie out of her mind. If Ottilie was cooking, the terrible old woman was sure to come poking around the stove. And when she did not like what there was to eat, she would take a mouthful and spit it on the floor. Every mess she could think of, she made. She wet the bed, insisted on having the goat in the room. Whatever she touched was soon spilled or broken, and to Royal she complained that a woman who could not keep a nice house for her husband was worthless. She was underfoot the whole day, and her red, remorseless eyes were seldom shut. But the worst of it, the thing that finally made Ottilie threaten to kill her, was the old woman's habit of sneaking up from nowhere and pinching her so hard you could see the fingernail marks. If you do that one more time, if you just dare, I'll snatch that knife and cut out your heart. Old Bonaparte knew Ottilie meant it, and thought she stopped the pinching. She thought of other jokes. For instance, she made a point of walking all over a certain part of the yard, pretending she did not know that Ottilie had planted a little garden there. One day, two exceptional things happened. A boy came from the village, bringing a letter for Ottilie. At the Champs-Élysées, postcards had once in a while arrived from sailors and other traveling men who had spent pleasant moments with her, but this was the first letter she'd ever received. Since she could not read it, her first impulse was to tear it up, but there was no use having it hang around to haunt her. Of course, there was a chance that some day she would learn to read, and so she went to hide it in her sewing basket. When she opened the sewing basket, she made a sinister discovery. There, like a gruesome ball of yarn, was the severed head of a yellow cat. So the miserable old woman was up to new tricks. She wanted to put a spell, thought Ottilie, not in the least frightened. Primarily lifting the head by one of its ears, she carried it to the stove and dropped it into a boiling pot. At noon, old Bonaparte sucked her teeth and remarked that the soup Ottilie had made for her was surprisingly tasty. In the morning, just in time for the midday meals, she found twisting in her baskets a small green snake which, chopping fine as sand, she sprinkled into a serving of stew. Each day, her ingenuity was tested. There were spiders to bake, a lizard to fry, a buzzard's breast to boil. Old Bonaparte ate several helpings of everything. With a restless glittering, her eyes followed Ottilie as she watched for some sign that the spell was taking hold. "You don't look well, Ottilie," she said, mixing a little molasses in the vinegar of her voice. "You eat like an ant. Here now, why don't you have a bowl of this good soup?" "Because," answered Ottilie evenly, "I don't like buzzard in my soup, or spiders in my bread. Snakes in the stew? I have no appetite for such things." Old Bonaparte understood. With swelling veins and stricken, powerless tongue, she rose shakily to her feet, then crashed across the table. Before nightfall she was dead. Ruel summoned mourners. They came from the village, from the neighboring hills, and wailing like the dogs at midnight laid siege to the house. Old women beat their heads against the wall. Moaning men prostrated themselves. It was the art of sorrow, and those who best mimicked grief were much admired. After the funeral, everybody went away, satisfied that they'd done a good job. Now, the house belonged to Ottilie, without old Bonaparte's prying and her mess to clean. She had more spare time, but she did not know what to do with it. She sprawled on the great brass bed. She loafed in front of the mirror. Monotony hummed in her head, and to drive away its flight bus sound, she would sing the song she'd learned from the jukebox at the Champs-Élysées. Waiting in the twilight for Royal, she would remember that at this hour her friends in Port-au-Prince were gossiping on the porch and waiting for the turning headlights of a car. But when she saw Royal ambling on the path, his cane cutter swinging at his side like a crescent moon, she forgot such thoughts and ran with a satisfied heart to meet him. One night, as they lay half drowsing, Ottilie felt suddenly another presence in the room. Then, gleaming there at the foot of the bed, she saw, as she had seen before, a watching eye. Thus she knew what for some time she had suspected, that old Bonaparte was dead, but not gone. Once, when she was alone in the house, she'd heard a laugh, and once again, out in the yard, she'd seen the goat gazing at someone who was not there and twinkling his ears as he did when the old woman scratched his skull. "Stop shaking the bed," said Royal, and Ottilie, with a finger raised at the eye, whisperingly asked him if he could not see it, when he replied that she was dreaming. She reached for the eye and screamed at feeling only air. Royal lighted a lamp. He cuddled Ottilie on his lap and smoothed her hair, while she told him of the discoveries she'd made in her sewing basket, and one how she had disposed of them. Was it wrong what she'd done? Royal didn't know. It was not for him to say, but it was his opinion that she would have to be punished. And why? Because the old woman wanted it. Because she would otherwise have never leave Ottilie in peace. That was the way with Hans. In accordance with this, Royal fetched a rope with the next morning and proposed to tie Ottilie to a tree in the yard. There she was to remain until dark, without food and water, and anyone passing would know her to be in a state of disgrace. But Ottilie crawled under the bed and refused to come out. "I'll run away," she whimpered. "Royal, if you try to tie me to that old tree, I'll run away." "Then I'd have to go and get you," said Royal, "and that would be the worst for you." He gripped her by an ankle and dragged her squealing from under the bed. All the way to the yard she caught at things: the door, a vine, the goat's beard, but none of these would hold her or Royal, and Royal was not detained from tying her to the tree. He made 3 knots in the rope. He went off to work, sucking his hand where she had bitten him. She hollered to him all the bad words she'd ever heard until he disappeared over the hill. The goat, Juno, and the chickens gathered to stare at her humiliation. Slumping to the ground, Ottilie stuck out her tongue at them. Because she was almost asleep, Ottilie thought it was a dream when, in the company of a child from the village, Baby and Rosita, wobbling on high heels and carrying fancy umbrellas, tottered up the path calling her name. Since they were people in a dream, they probably would not be surprised to find her tied to a tree. "My God, are you mad?" shrieked Baby, keeping her distance as though she feared that indeed this must be the case. "Speaking to us, Ottilie." Blinking, giggling, Ottilie said, "I'm just happy to see you. Please untie me so that I can hug you both." "So this is what Brute does," said Rosita, tearing all the ropes. "Wait till I see him, beating you and tying you In a yard like a dog? Oh no, said Ottilie. Royal never beats me. It's just that day I'm being punished. You wouldn't listen to us, said Baby. And now you see what's come of it. That man has plenty to answer for, she added. Brandishing her umbrella. Ottilie hugged her friends and kissed them. Isn't it a pretty house, she said, leading them towards it. It's like you picked a wagon of flowers and built a house with them. That is what I think. Come in, out of the sun. It's cool inside and smells so sweet. Rosita sniffed as though she smelled was nothing sweet. And in her well-bottomed voice declared that, yes, it was better that they stay out of the sun, as it seemed to be affecting Ottilie's head. It's a mercy that we've come, said Baby, fishing inside an enormous purse. And you can thank Mr. Jemison for that. Madam said you were dead, and when you never answered our letter, we thought it must be so. But Mr. Jemison said the loveliest man you'll ever know, that's the loveliest man you'll ever know. He hired a car for me and Rosita, your dearest loved friends, to come up and find out what happened to our Ottilie. Ottilie, I've got a bottle of rum here in my purse, so get us a glass and we'll all have a round. The elegant foreign manners and flashing finery of the city ladies had intoxicated their guide, a little boy whose peaking black eyes bubbled at the window. Ottilie was impressed too, for it was a long time since she'd been painted lips or smelled bottle perfume, and while Baby poured the rums, she got her satin shoes, her pearl earrings. Dear, said Rosita, when Ottilie had finished dressing up, there's no man alive that wouldn't buy you a whole keg of beer. To think of it, a gorgeous piece like you, suffering far away from those who love you. I haven't been suffering so much, said Ottilie. Just sometimes. Hush now, said Baby. You don't have to talk about it yet. It's all over anyway. Here, dear, let me see your glass again. A toast to old times and those to be. Tonight, Mr. Jamison is going to buy champagne for everybody. Madam is letting him have it at half price. Oh, said Ottilie, envying her friends. Well, she wanted to know, what did people say for her? Was she remembered? Ottilie, you have no idea, said Baby. Men nobody ever laid eyes on before have come into the place asking for Ottilie, because they've heard about you way off in Havana and Miami. As for Mr. Jamison, he doesn't even look at us other girls. Just comes and sits on the porch drinking by himself. Yes, said Ottilie wistfully. He was always sweet to me, Mr. Jamison. Presently the sun was slanting, and the bottle of rum stood 3/4 empty. A thunderburst of rain had for a moment drenched the hills that now, seen through the windows, shimmered like dragonfly wings, and a breeze rich with the scent of rained-on flowers roamed the room, rustling the green and pink papers on the wall. Many stories had been told, some of them funny, a few of them were sad. It was like any night's talk at the Champs-Élysées, and Ottilie was happy to be a part of it again. But it's getting late, said Baby, and we promised to be back before midnight. Ottilie, can we help you pack? Although she had not realized that her friends expected her to live with them, the rum stirring in her made it seem a likely assumption, and with a smile she thought, I told him I would go away. Only she said aloud, it's not like I would have even a week to enjoy myself. Royal will come right down and get me. Both her friends laughed at this. You're so silly, said Baby. I'd like to see that Royal when some of our men got through with him. I wouldn't stand for anybody hurting Royal, said Ottilie. Besides, he'd be even better when we got home. Baby said, but Ottilie, you wouldn't be coming back here with him. Ottilie giggled and looked about the room as though she saw something invisible to the others. Why, sure I would, she said. Rolling her eyes, Baby produced a fan and jerked it in front of her face. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard, she said between hard lips. Isn't that the craziest thing you've ever heard, Rosita? It's that Ottilie has been through so much, said Rosita. Dear, why don't you lie down on a bed while we'll pack your things? Ottilie watched as they commenced piling her possessions. They scooped her combs and pins. They wound up her silk stockings. She took off her pretty clothes, as if she were going to put on something finer still. Instead, she slipped back into her old dress, then walked in quietly. And as though she were helping her friend, she put everything back where they belonged. Baby stamped her foot when she saw what was happening. Listen, said Ottilie. If you and Rosita are my friends, please do what I tell you. Tie me in the yard just like I was when you came. That way no bee is ever going to sting me. Stinking drunk, said Baby, but Rosita told her to shut up. I think, said Rosita with a sigh, I think Ottilie is in love. If Royal wanted her back, she would go with him. And this being the way things were, they might as well go home and say that Madame was right, that Ottilie was dead. Yes, said Ottilie, for the drama of it appealed to her. Tell them that I'm dead. So they went into the yard. There, with heaving bosoms and eyes as round as the daytime moon squatting above, Baby said she would have no part in tying Ottilie to the tree, which left Rosita to do it alone. On parting, it was Ottilie who cried the most, though she was glad to see them go, for she knew that as soon as they were gone, she would not think of them again. Peering on their high heels down the dips of the path, they turned to wave, but Ottilie could not wave back, and so she forgot them before they were out of sight. Chewing eucalyptus leaves to sweeten her breath, she felt the chill of twilight twitch the air. Yellow deepened the daytime moon, and roosting birds sailed into the darkness of the tree. Suddenly hearing Royal on the path, she threw her legs akimbo, let her neck go limp, lulled her eyes far back into their sockets. Seen from a distance, it would look as though she had come to some violent, pitiful end. And listening to Royal's footsteps quicken to a run, she happily thought, this will give him a good taste.